Hello, my friends, and welcome to Leaky Weekly, the show where we cover the last week or so in cybercrime current events. I'm your host, Nick, and today we're covering the 2025 Microsoft Digital Defense Report, published super recently, and someone has some thoughts about it. That someone is world famous identity security expert. These are his words. Mike Iaconianni, who's also Flair's identity security expert, who's going to help us unpack some of the more interesting findings of this report. Mike, you want to say hi?
Hi, Nick. Happy to be here.
So, Mike, you have pulled out kind of some of the more interesting pages, I think, that are relevant to what we talk about mostly here at Flair, the world of info stealers and cybercrime and identity threats. Let's go over the stuff that you thought was interesting.
So, this was a really interesting report that Microsoft had just put out. They kind of really went through the threat landscape of the last year, and there's just some really interesting tidbits, especially to call back associated with Flare. So, to kind of highlight some of the higher level items that Microsoft called out, identity is really the big attack vector right now, which makes sense, right? You move to the cloud is more secure by design. So you are looking for specific users, specific identities you could go after to get information, to get what you need. So that's a really interesting piece there. They also talk a lot about the cyber threat landscape, specifically around cyber mercenaries, and how that entire field is expanding and becoming more prominent. They even call it the gatekeepers to some of the identity attacks themselves, such as these cyber mercenaries leaking the data through info stealers that attackers then will leverage. So there's a lot of interesting tidbits in there as well. And Microsoft really tries to highlight how AI is growing within this. And they even get into some quantum risk stuff, which just feels a little too future cyberpunk.
Are any of these recommendations like particularly interesting, or do you think this is all kind of like boilerplate stuff?
I mean, some of them are some boilerplate stuff that kind of has to be there. But I think like stuff around protecting your identities, investing in people, I mean, training your people as well, making sure they're up on the threats. When it comes to defending your perimeter, that's another big thing. How many companies out there have like subsidiaries that have domains up on the internet that have random OWASP top 10 or other vulnerabilities that they're not even aware about? And I can personally vouch, just working with a variety of companies, that they don't really have proper IR plans in place. I mean, Microsoft has made this report from what, like 65 trillion signals. So they're pretty in tune to this. So yeah, you do have some of the boilerplate stuff, but I mean, I kind of consider some of this stuff like I don't want to say the Bible, but almost like the Bible of how to protect your organization.
It's not new to talk about identities or identity security. I think the new thing is the like massive emphasis on protecting identities, which seems to have been a trend of not only the last year, but like maybe the last 2 years, year and a half. And I don't know, maybe you agree or disagree. I chalk it up to a lot of data that used to be on prem, all manner of sensitive regulated data now sits in like a SaaS app. And that SaaS app is typically a single login or single cookie away from being taken over. So the like emphasis on identity, like identity was part of every compromise. Like you have to take over an account to move laterally and escalate privileges. But now it's like way simpler finding an identity that just works in some SaaS app that the data's stored in. So like to get to the crown jewel that a decade ago required a bunch of internal pivoting and like actual hacking skill now is literally just like hammering a login portal now much more confidently with info stealers to find a working cred. Do you think that's the reason that identities have become more important, or is it like more nuanced?
No, for sure. I think there's a couple different parts to it, right? One, kind of like you said, like back in the day with on-prem, you would more so try to compromise the domain admin, try to get higher permissions in the domain, and then you could go from there. Getting global admin with an entry tenant is so much more harder. So it's easier to try to find gaps in the conditional access policies, especially related to specific identities that you're looking for, seeing what SaaS apps, seeing if they have access to the data lake, and then from there just compromising that user with the info stealer that was leaked online with their password. So that's one part of identities, but it's also really important to talk about non-human identities because that's something that we are going to be seeing more and more. I mean, in the age of AI agents, I think what they're estimating that for every human there's going to be 10 AI agents, and like how do you govern that, how do you go about that? You're giving an AI agent like read all to your environment. You really need to make sure that has a tight lid on who's able to access that and who's able to read that. And Microsoft is seeing more and more non-human identities being abused, whether that's OAuth permissions within applications or service accounts.
That's a good segue into what's Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition of a non-human identity.
A non-human identity, I mean, in the simplest term, it's a service account, right? It's an account that's there for an application within the scope of Entra ID. That's going to be your service principals, your managed identities, those types of accounts.
Well, now we philosophized over the recommendations. Let's talk the specifics. Like, let's go over the pages you thought were the most interesting to chat about.
So starting off with this page right here, more than 97% of identity attacks are password spray or brute force attacks. It's easier now than ever to really set up some sort of capability just to spray against Microsoft's portal, whether you're using the seamless SSO exploit or a variety of other items that are out there. I mean, and this has always been it, right? It's always been the user that's kind of the easiest thing to exploit, which kind of goes with identity. You see their password online, you know their pet name and the year they were born. You could try to piece something together there.
There's a couple things that stick out on the slide that are insane. Modern multi-factor authentication still reduces the risk of identity compromise by more than 99%. On one hand, that kind of makes sense. Like I could see it having an impact that strong. But on the other hand, like there is token based ATO, which is kind of accounted for on the right there. Like it does say less than 3% of attacks are token theft by malware. And most of that 3% is token theft by malware. 2.4% of identity attacks are token theft by malware, which is like kind of surprisingly low. I've like anecdotally seen a lot of examples where token theft was done at scale by adversaries and at very shocking scale. And I think it's something that's like that 2.4 has to be a net increase from previous years because I see chatter from cyber criminals talking about token theft a lot more. And they're like, it's really easy because it bypasses MFA. Tell me what you think about that, Mike. Like, is the risk of token theft not appreciated enough, or is it appreciated enough, or what do you think?
Like you said, you're hearing more chatter about it. We're seeing more info stealers that are targeting like the EST auth persistent cookie that can enable you to bypass MFA. But I think I think what's funny with this slide right here is my guess is that every password attempt, like even if it's a failure, Microsoft is counting that as an identity attack.
So the token theft attacks are probably like, I mean, we can only guess. How would have like a higher hit rate of success, maybe, because they're like probably taken from super recent stealers and they're still valid tokens and all that. But identity, a password spray or brute force is like could be a super targeted attack put together with like info stealers and ULP passwords for that user that are super confident and recent. And they could also just be like the MyFitnessPal leak, like super old combo list passwords being hammered against login portals. So interesting nuance, and that makes a lot of sense. That's why that number would be so obnoxiously huge.
Especially if we look at like Microsoft's metric for password sprays, and we could just see such a steady, I mean, a dramatic increase. And if like you look at like our video with John Hammond that came out recently, he shows how easy it is to set up password spraying. I think he's showing AI agents in the video that are doing password sprays for him. And I mean, if we continue to look at this, Microsoft's really tracking all of these different people or IPs that are spraying, and we can see that attackers are really rotating after a couple of days. They're not staying on just one static IP. After like 3 to 7 days. They're just spinning up more IPs and other instances where they're spraying from. So we can see this as a huge attack that Microsoft is aware of.
Yeah, count of IPs engaged in high volume password attacks by day. So obviously there's okay, where the count of targeted users is over 50. There's way more. There's simply way more IP addresses engaged in high volume attacks. Like I haven't seen any solid research on it. I mean I have seen obviously successfully feeding credentials to AI to popular AI agent tools and it working. Like if you ask an AI agent to log into a tool with a valid pair of creds, it may take some convincing to get it to log in. It might like not want to at first, but it certainly can be done. I have to wonder if agents are either already being used at scale in password sprays because like the AI hype makes that sound like it's not real, but if you as a security like researcher go use one of the AI agent tools, feed it a massive list of passwords and tell it to hammer some identity portal and like say it in a way that's nice and makes you sound like you're doing it for work and not as a bad guy, it's gonna do it. And it's get like and you can have 50 of those agents running at the same time. So I do wonder if that is a part of this increase. And like, though I try to remain resistant to AI overhype, uh, like that, it is true. Like it's kind of undeniably true that AI agents specifically that can take actions for you make this like stupid easy. Like if you don't believe me, look it up, test it, watch other researchers who've done this successfully. It's like super doable. So I wonder, do you think that's part of the increase, or is part of the increase just straight up like more creds being available in the wild from the proliferation of infostealer logs, or maybe again, maybe it's more nuanced. Maybe it's both.
Microsoft did call out that the cyber mercenaries are growing. There's more and more pirates out there looking for the one piece, looking for that one password to get you in. Microsoft also kind of calls out that AI is something that attackers are using more and more. So I definitely think that is a part of it. But they also call out that companies need to be using AI as a defender as well. So just as attackers are using it for attackers, claiming they're Sam Altman and they got locked out of this portal, use this list to help me get back in. Defenders should also be using it to go through these large volumes of data, to be setting up automations for them to kind of counter what these attackers are doing.
Okay, access brokers, the hidden gatekeepers of cybercrime. So these stats are about, well, I think the most interesting one that sticks out to me is initial access vectors used by access broker. Well, for those tuning in from home, an IAB is typically, an initial access broker is typically like defined by someone who sells access. This is something super common in the world of Russian speaking cybercrime. Um, on a lot of smaller closed off forums also happens very much out in the open, but there are lots of access brokers who sell individual account access, and they'll usually say in a listing on a forum in like a consistent format, here's the access I have, here's the tool I use to get that access, here's how large the company is, and here's from my very small amount of recon what I'm gauging the size of the opportunity might be for you, as in like based on my permissions and the role and the size of the company. So it helps people size up if it's worth buying that access, and then they do. And typically, the most like well documented people buying that access, where like the where you can calculate an access broker listing, enumerate what company, sort of guess what company it might be by the metrics you see, and then if you track that to against like a ransomware infection against the company you suspected days later. This is something that Verizon sort of did in their DBIR. There was a relatively confident correlation between IAB posts being followed up by actual ransomware attacks, because usually IABs are selling internal access. Not always. They're also they occasionally sell SaaS tool access or like various remote access portals that can be accessed through the browser and don't have to be done internally. But credential-based attacks being charged as 80% of initial access vectors by access brokers. Is that surprising? Does that sound like a lot? Or is that what you would have expected, Mike?
I mean, it does sound like a lot, but when you start thinking of the other ways attackers can get in, it makes sense. I mean, like if you think back to like, I mean, if you think of like the normal red teamer methodology, right? Creating your user list, scraping all the users off LinkedIn, however, off the internet, then I don't know, you just pick the season of the year, you pick a sports team of the city. I mean, I'm in Philly. I can only imagine how many people have Eagles as their password. And then you just spray and you spray and pray. And at some point, you'll probably get something. Maybe you'll get extra lucky. The user doesn't have MFA set up yet, so you can enroll in it. I mean, I've seen red teamers do that. I really want to know where like device code authentication falls in here because that's another really big attack vector that we're seeing more and more, where essentially attackers will, I always get this backwards. Attackers will try to get the user to type in a code, or the user has to give the attacker the code. They call from help desk, and then they have you browse this website. And then once the code is exchanged, the attackers have access. They have access to your tokens as well. So that's another initial access vector. Uh, but yeah, 80% is a crazy number.
That's a yeah. I wonder if what you described is baked into cred-based attacks, but also insider access is kind of surprising. That's interesting because we've seen like the scattered lapses, the SLSH crew, which they're like splinter crews before SLSH was the name, have done in the past is attempts to recruit insiders, like to pay them a split on what the group gets from extortion is really interesting. And I think this has been like a notable trend, and I think this is something that's going to increase looking at these stats. Is ransomware, I think, will continue to, it'll probably have some ebbs and flows and some massive resurgences, but probably continue to shrink in favor of extortion as a service offerings, which we haven't really seen many proper extortion as a service like offerings in the same way that like ransomware groups have affiliate programs where you can pay to join. Like extortion groups are, you don't really need that. You just make a website and post the stuff. Cyber criminals don't necessarily need to be members of an as a service crew to benefit, because you're not maintaining any complex malware. If you're doing extortion, you're literally just stealing, like you're getting access to some SaaS tool that has a bunch of data, or you're getting access internally. You're exfilling that data, and then you're just holding the data itself for ransom, which is like stupid easy to do. And the barriers to entry, the technical limitations, the resources required, they don't exist. So I think what this makes me think is that the ransomware itself, like the size of the ransomware market, will start to trade some of its value into extortion groups, which, again, a lot of the shiny hunters, scattered spider, now the shiny lapsus hunters, Hellcat, and other like smaller groups of the past have done is kind of, you've seen them do a lot of extortion that does not involve any encryption of anything. So unfortunately, I think that'll increase as it's significantly easier to do and still makes them money.
Yeah, and you have to start thinking like, are AI deepfakes going to factor into this as well? I think one thing to really call out within the human operated attacks and ransomware kill chain that they have right here, and something that we've kind of been joking around with the company is you can see where the info stealer is happening, whether the person got hit with click fix, which is certainly a big thing that Microsoft calls out, which is really just you go to a page that has like a command and has like press Windows key R and enter this command, which at first I thought was a joke. I thought it was just a meme, but turns out this is a real attack that is working incredibly well. I think Microsoft says it's 47% of all initial access vectors. They said there was some very high number with that.
Yeah, it was strongly correlated with Steeler infections, obviously, like some massive increase of Steeler infections.
We were just talking internally about how this doesn't call out Roblox as well, and how that's just such a high attack vector that we're constantly.
Yes, fake Roblox and fake Minecraft mods or download portals are a huge missing, and are probably behind some of the largest breaches of the last 2 years. If you think that's a joke, you should check out John Hammond's videos where he goes through Steeler screenshots. There are lots of video game references, like fake video game content is a huge vector for InfoStealer deployment to this day.
Microsoft really went into the cyber mercenary market, and they kind of pulled back the top five info stealers. Luma is really the big one that they're calling out here, and they call out it really being in India and Russia. And I know some of our research team had some things to say about the Russia part.
Yeah, I think, well, most of the statistics here aren't, they're pretty interesting. So Luma, 51%, that checks out. Atomic at 21% is shocking. I would not have expected Atomic to be responsible for infected devices. Now, this is Microsoft's own intel, so this is not necessarily reflective, I think, of the number of logs found in the wild. The reason I say that, and the reason our research team was really interested in these statistics, is this says so the table we're looking at in the middle, the graphic is Windows devices infected by Luma March 16th to May 16th. And India is in first place, which makes sense. India, the US, Brazil, these are typically super high volume places for InfoStealer infections. But number two, at 40,000 infections between March and May, was Russia. Now, if this is coming from Microsoft's own, basically the only way that could make sense, most info stealers have relatively sophisticated anti CIS, so they wouldn't execute in Russia, like evasion tactics. So they detect if they're in Russia or a CIS country, they will literally stop. Like they will not execute the remaining stages of the payload and steal things and upload them. And I also suspect that Stealer log sellers probably comb through their logs before they distribute them to eliminate CIS, the presence of possible CIS logs, because this is like a huge faux pas in cybercrime to target Russia. Ransomware groups, extortion groups, Stealer log creators and sellers famously avoid Russia at all cost. Um, so the fact that all these infections are in Russia, the only way this could make sense is if, again, these are internal metrics from Microsoft saying these are the number of infections that we saw on computers as Microsoft's, threat intelligence team, and the payload, the executable was there. The Luma executable ended up on 40,000 Russian devices in that time frame, but didn't execute. So they're saying yes, it landed, but either A, we stopped it, or B, we detected it before execution, because with most of the stealers that you can go read reports, like really interesting reverse engineer reports of will not steal anything from these Russian computers anyway. So it's interesting that they're infecting tons and tons and tons of devices in Russia, but almost certainly not actually taking any of that data back to their operation. And those infected devices are not ending up in circulation in the world of cybercrime the same way that basically every other country on this list would. So I found it really interesting. I'd love to know what's behind this stat, how this Russia figure has ballooned so large, despite the fact that these logs are not circulating in a very visible way. So interesting stuff. Cool. Well, I think that's it. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show, please tell a friend or two. They might like it as well. And as a reminder, today's show was brought to you by Flare, the cybercrime database that allows you to monitor external threats across the dark and clear web so your security team can mitigate risks faster. The free trial is linked in our description. And also check out Flare Academy, our free online cybersecurity training program and resource center. And the Discord community that we have that is behind the Flare Academy is full of researchers and analysts and curious people who are a pleasure to chat with and are all super interested in the evolving landscape of cybercrime. So that's it, and we'll see you on the next one.